Blake Shelton sat in the brightly lit studio chair with a relaxed grin, but anyone who knew him well could sense that he was holding back a storm as Joy Behar launched into her opening comments with that unmistakable sharp tone she used whenever a guest's opinion rubbed her the wrong way. Blake had come on the show expecting the usual light-hearted banter about music, touring, and the odd funny story from life on the farm. But the moment the cameras started rolling, Joy decided to steer the conversation into heated territory, questioning his views on celebrity culture, poking at his recent comments about authenticity in the entertainment world, and suggesting that some artists, him included, benefited from the very things they criticized. The audience chuckled uncomfortably as Joy kept pushing, but Blake held his ground, looking straight at her with that signature amused smirk that made it clear he wasn't intimidated. When Joy interrupted him for the third time, he leaned forward, planting both boots firmly on the studio floor as if bracing himself to fire back in a way that the crowd and the millions watching would never forget. His southern charm didn't slip, but there was a new edge in his voice as he warned her, politely at first, that she was twisting his words. Joy brushed it off with a wave of her hand, trying to make it seem like he was being sensitive, and that was the moment the temperature in the room began to rise dramatically. Blake could feel the weight of the moment, knowing full well that once he started speaking his mind with total honesty, the show would take a turn that would echo through Hollywood gossip circles by the end of the day. Joy tried to maintain control of the conversation by talking over him, but Blake wasn't the kind of man who let himself be steamrolled, especially not when someone questioned his integrity. As Joy kept pushing about what she called manufactured authenticity, Blake's patience thinned until he finally cut in with the firm tone that drew immediate cheers from the live audience. He told her that if anyone knew about manufactured drama, it was talk show hosts who made a living out of stirring conflict where none existed, a pointed remark that caused Joy to sit up straighter with a flash of irritation in her eyes. The co-hosts glanced nervously at one another, sensing that the situation was quickly slipping beyond the usual boundaries of daytime television sparring. But Blake wasn't done. He explained that he built his career on real music, real stories, and real people, not scripted outrage designed to grab headlines. Joy tried to counter him by insisting that all celebrities had teams crafting narratives behind them, but Blake laughed, telling her that she clearly didn't understand his world and maybe that was why she kept misrepresenting everything he said. The audience roared with approval, making Joy more determined to regain control. She attempted to interrupt again, but Blake raised his voice just enough to keep talking, making it clear that he wasn't going to let her escape the uncomfortable truth he was laying bare. The tension grew sharper as Joy leaned forward, narrowing her eyes as she accused Blake of playing the victim to earn public sympathy, claiming that country artists thrived on that narrative. Blake shook his head slowly, taking a deep breath before delivering a measured response that cut through the studio's thick atmosphere. He reminded Joy that while she sat in a comfortable studio tossing opinions around, he had spent decades touring, working long hours, and facing the realities of a demanding career that didn't allow shortcuts. The crowd applauded loudly, and Blake seized the moment to emphasize that authenticity wasn't a marketing tool, it was the foundation of every song he had ever written. Joy tried to counter by suggesting that his relationship with Hollywood had changed him, but Blake shot back that the only thing Hollywood changed was how often he had to deal with people who misunderstood him. The laughter from the audience signaled a shift, and Joy's frustration became more visible as she realized her argument wasn't landing the way she had hoped. Blake didn't raise his voice, but the firmness in it spoke volumes, and even the co-host seemed hesitant to intervene as the energy in the room tipped definitively in his favor. Joy pivoted, attempting a different tactic by bringing up controversies from Blake's past, hoping to corner him or catch him off guard. She referenced old comments, trying to paint him as inconsistent, but Blake surprised everyone by calmly addressing each point without defensiveness. Instead of dodging, he acknowledged his mistakes, saying that growth was part of being human, something every especially public figure had to navigate. The audience applauded as his honesty undercut Joy's attempt to put him on the defensive. Joy pushed again, trying to tie his past statements to the current discussion, but Blake emphasized that the world had become too obsessed with outrage, and people like Joy were partly responsible for fueling that environment. The remark hit hard, and Joy stiffened, looking briefly taken aback before trying to regain her footing with another sharp question. Blake leaned back, crossing his arms, unfazed, as he reminded her that the purpose of art was to connect, heal, and entertain, and not to serve as constant fodder for political or social feuds created by people who needed ratings. Even the camera operators seemed to freeze, sensing that they were capturing a moment that would dominate social media within minutes. Blake began speaking with the clarity that silenced the entire panel as he explained how disconnected certain media personalities had become from the everyday American experience. He talked about fans who came to his concerts not for drama or politics but for joy, escape, and music that meant something to them. The sincerity in his voice resonated deeply with the audience, who cheered so loudly that the producers had to briefly lower the studio microphones. Joy attempted to interject with a sarcastic remark, but Blake pressed on, saying that her approach to interviewing guests was more about scoring points than having meaningful conversations. Joy's jaw tightened as she forced a smile, insisting she was simply asking tough questions. But Blake gently mocked the idea, saying tough questions were funny, yet twisting someone's words wasn't. The co-hosts attempted to lighten the mood, but Blake kept his focus steady, refusing to let her redirect or dilute his message. By this point, the atmosphere had shifted so dramatically that Joy's usual confidence wavered, and the audience's applause made it clear that they were siding with Blake. Not ready to give up, Joy shifted into another angle, bringing up comments Blake made about valuing privacy despite being a public figure. She claimed it was contradictory, but Blake responded sharply, saying he shared his life on his terms, not on the terms imposed by media personalities looking for the next big headline. His words struck with precision as he described how his fans respected boundaries far more than journalists or commentators who constantly demanded access. The applause grew louder, and Joy found herself momentarily speechless, searching for a comeback. Blake used the pause to point out that the public didn't want to see their favorite artists dragged into unnecessary drama, and that shows like this sometimes lost sight of the line between accountability and sensationalism. Joy finally attempted to redirect the conversation, but Blake gently insisted on finishing his point, prompting even more cheers. It became clear that Blake wasn't just defending himself, he was calling out the entire culture of manufactured outrage that had become a staple of daytime television. Joy finally snapped, accusing Blake of attacking her personally rather than discussing ideas. But Blake responded calmly, saying he had no interest in personal attacks and that everything he said applied to the environment of the show, not her as a human being. He stressed the importance of genuine conversation, criticizing how certain platforms turn dialogue into confrontation for entertainment value. Joy tried to deny it, but Blake pointed out examples from previous episodes, highlighting how the show often elevated conflict instead of connection. The audience gasped at his boldness, and Joy struggled to regain her composure. Blake reassured her that he wasn't angry but simply tired of narratives that reduced people to simplified versions of themselves. His tone softened, but his message remained firm, and the viewers could feel the raw honesty pouring from him. The co-hosts shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to intervene without worsening the situation, while the audience hung on to every word Blake delivered with unwavering confidence. As Joy attempted to regain control by reverting to humor, Blake lightly shook his head, saying that sometimes humor was used to mask discomfort instead of addressing the actual issue. Joy's smile faded slightly as Blake elaborated, saying that while he respected comedy, there was a line between humor and deflection, and she had crossed it more than once during their exchange. The audience murmured in agreement, and Joy's irritation became visible again. Blake clarified that he wasn't against tough discussions but believed they had to be rooted in respect and understanding rather than interruptions and accusations. He reminded the panel that every guest deserved to finish a sentence without having their words twisted halfway through. The crowd applauded, and even some of the co-hosts nodded subtly, acknowledging the truth in his statement. Joy inhaled deeply, trying to maintain her composure as Blake's steady confidence continued to shift the energy entirely in his favor. The exchange reached its peak when Joy attempted to reclaim the narrative by accusing Blake of promoting divisiveness, but Blake countered swiftly, saying the only divisiveness present was the one created by her insistence on misrepresenting his intentions. He pointed out how she framed his comments to fit a storyline that didn't reflect reality, and the audience responded with thunderous applause. Joy, growing visibly flustered, said she was simply doing her job, but Blake countered by saying a job built on misunderstanding someone wasn't journalism, it was performance. The crowd erupted again, and even the co-host seemed stunned by the clarity and force of his words. Blake emphasized that he respected honest questions but not manipulative ones, and the audience applauded so loudly that Joy had to pause. She glanced toward the producers for support, but they remained silent, unwilling to interrupt the moment that was clearly becoming viral material. By the time the segment neared its end, Joy had all but stopped trying to refute Blake's points, realizing that the audience and even her fellow hosts recognized the truth in his words. Blake concluded by saying that he wasn't on the show to win an argument but to share his perspective honestly and respectfully. He added that if people wanted authenticity from celebrities, they needed to allow space for real conversations without constant interruption or distortion. The audience rose in a standing ovation, something rarely seen during confrontational segments. Joy forced a smile, thanking Blake for the spirited discussion, but her voice lacked its usual energy. Blake smiled back politely, adjusting his jacket as he stood, leaving Joy momentarily speechless as his final words echoed throughout the studio. The moment he walked off stage, producers scrambled, co-hosts whispered among themselves, and social media exploded with clips of Blake's calm but devastating dismantling of Joy's aggressive questioning. Hollywood had seen countless clashes on live television, but this one stood out, not because Blake raised his voice or lashed out, but because he stayed true to himself, delivered truth with precision, and left Joy Behar unable to keep up with the sincerity and strength of his conviction.